started for your school districts around the country, or it's about to start. And I don't know about you, but I start to feel pressure every year. And for those of you who are new to homeschooling, you're probably feeling that anxiety and excitement and pressure and all of those things. And I've talked to many new homeschooling moms who are freaking out a little bit because they don't know everything. They don't have everything ready. They don't have the curriculums ordered. And if that's you, guess what? Take a breath, a big deep breath, and breathe in and breathe out and relax, because guess what? It's okay. It's okay if you don't have everything ready, because you still probably have to go through a little bit of deschooling anyway. And so what I want you to do, but I had that same anxiety and that same fear. And even at the beginning of every new school year, I feel a little bit of pressure and anxiety. Is everything ready? And then I have to remind myself, no, reduce and simplify. Slow and steady wins the race, just like the turtle in The Tortoise and the Hare, right? And so I want you to slow down. I want you to breathe, because you don't need to know everything or have everything 100% ready before you start your kids homeschooling this year. So breathe and relax. It's okay. So back to when we first started homeschooling, as I had mentioned in episode 1, I bought all of these curriculums. That was the very first thing that I did, was start calling around saying, what curriculum do I buy? Which was the wrong thing to ask. That was the wrong thing to ask and the wrong thing to do. What I really needed to do was understand my kids better, as I've mentioned before. I really needed to slow things down, and I needed to deschool. So if you haven't already deschooled, and if you skipped the deschooling podcast episode, you need to go back and listen to it, okay? Because you do need to go through deschooling with your kids and relax. And by the way, deschooling also gives you an opportunity and to really study about different philosophies so that you can best meet the needs of your children. But that's not what I did. I instead started ordering curriculums, and I spent a lot of money on it, which I wish I hadn't spent on it. And when you're in a tight budget, that's not a great thing. So at the beginning, I want you to really lean into free resources that are out there, such as the Khan Academy. If you feel like, no, I have to have a curriculum, which I did. I needed that crutch for a little while. Khan Academy is free. Pedagogies.com is free. Brilliant.org is free for upper level math. Mysteryscience.com is not free, but they do have some free lessons, and it's a science website. Go to the library, lean into the free resources that are already available to you before you start buying curriculums, okay? That's the very first thing that you need to do. Don't go out and start buying everything under the sun. And for those of you who have young children, you young moms especially, don't start going out and buying curriculums, right? Your kids up through the age of 8.5, really, they learn through play with them a lot, read aloud with them a lot, do some basic math, cook with them. They'll be just fine. I promise they'll be just fine. I've seen a large amount of young moms freaking out about their 5-year-olds. And I'm like, really slow down, baby. You got time. So I want you to relax and spend some time. If you feel like, no, we've got to be doing something, read, write, do basic math. If you signed up for a couple classes for your kids, great, have them do those classes. But again, this is your time to really get to know your children over the next few weeks and the next few months, and they're going to be just fine. A lot of you I know freak out and are like, no, what if they're behind? What if they're behind? They will be just fine. I promise. If COVID taught me anything, it's that they don't do that much anyway in school, which I already knew because I used to teach in school. So I was aware of how fast things go, and teachers can only go as fast as the slowest student. You get to go as fast or slow as your kids need to go. So let's talk about curriculum, pedagogy, and philosophies. And I want to tell you a little bit about continue our homeschooling story of what happened next. Curriculum and pedagogy are not the same thing. Curriculum is what is taught. Pedagogy is how you teach it. And then there's educational philosophies, which in my mind really is almost pedagogy, right? When I was in my post-baccalaureate work to get my teaching license and certification, we talked about, different learning styles and trying to meet those different learning styles. And we did talk about pedagogies and curriculums, but really the pedagogy that's used in public school is generally the teacher dispenses the information, the students take it in, the teacher grades the child. It's the same with university. There are some arguments about pedagogy. Some say that there's pedagogical principles, and I hope I just didn't butcher that word because I'm talking too fast, that they bring up challenge, explanation, modeling, practice, feedback, questioning, is that it's child-centered versus teacher-centered and all those things. But really, in the public school system, this is how it's done. The teacher dispenses information, the students take it in, and then they get graded on it. That's the standard practice in public schools. Again, occasionally we'll get really remarkable teachers who try to use different approaches to teaching information to the children, teaching the curriculum to the children. And they try to get creative and do projects and things like that. But really, it's still a stand to deliver principle. The teacher's the expert, and the children learn like little mice getting crumbs from the table. Okay. In the United States, the curriculum that is expected is following Common Core standards. And so these are the expectations, is that, follow these Common Core standards, and this is what is expected that you teach them. Again, is what is taught is the curriculum. The pedagogy is how do you teach it? Well, for me, when we started homeschooling, I bought curriculums right away. I bought for math. I bought for my older son teaching textbooks, which is an online program. And then for my younger kids, I decided to use Math UC. That's MATH, the letter U, SEE, Math UC, which gave me a book. I ordered the books, and then I started doing it with the kids. For writing, we chose The Good and the Beautiful, and that's what we had picked for writing. For science, I had also ordered The Good and the Beautiful. I had been told, oh yeah, they're inexpensive, curriculums, and so it was great. So that's why I ordered. That's why I had a couple friends say it's great. I also ordered Story of the World for history, and we listened to the audio CDs. Okay, so that's what some of the curriculums that we use. Now, in homeschooling, well, I guess in public school too, their curriculum I found is divided up into two different camps. You've got the secular camp and you've got the religious camp. Religious curriculums, or what is being taught. And usually there's a specific order to things being taught with curriculums. In the religious camp, usually there is a religious worldview that is taught within the curriculum, whether that's a biblical perspective, a Christian perspective. Sometimes it gets very specific, a Catholic perspective. And then on the secular side, my observation is they remove any mention of God or religion completely from the curriculum, which is what in our public schools, they are taught with secular curriculums. Now, for those of us who have religious worldviews, I believe that's somewhat problematic. When I teach my kids, I want to have my kids have definitely a Christian worldview, because those are my values and beliefs. Remember, when we talked about this last week, is really like, what do you want to teach your kids? Like, what are the most important things that you want to teach them before they leave the house? So as you're looking at curriculum, if you decide that, yes, I want to go a curriculum route, as you're looking at the different curriculums, you want to see and discover if those curriculums indeed match your world view. They may or they may not. And if they don't use them. I have used some secular curriculums. I don't think they're all bad, right? I don't think all religious curriculums are necessarily great. And I don't think all secular curriculums are all bad or all great. So you're going to find different curriculums may or may not work for your family. And you might find that you don't want to use curriculum at all, which leads into pedagogy, how we're going to teach something. So if you want to teach your child the subject of biology, there's a lot of different ways. You could buy a curriculum. You could go online and purchase a curriculum, or do an online class. You could buy a book. You could go to the library and see, what curriculums they have available. There's all sorts of options. How you teach that then becomes up to you. So that's what I want you to think about first, is before you start going out and buying a bunch of curriculums, you need to do the preliminary work of the deschooling and understand how your kids learn and what are the most important things that you want to teach your children. Okay. I know many of you are still worried about, well, what about state standards and national standards? And every state has them. And how do I hit all of those? You will, I promise. You're going to hit everything. So for me, back to our story, I started with a few curriculums, Math UC, teaching textbooks, The Good and the Beautiful. And then I found we'd work on it for a few minutes each day. My son was really surprised. He actually liked that he could get his math done in 45 minutes, what would have taken him at school a month or a month and a half for his teacher to get through. He was baffled by that. But beyond that, as I had mentioned before, I had to take a step back and really start discovering who my kids really were, having wonder and asking questions and really getting to know them in a different light. I also had to let go of some of the curriculums that right away I had purchased and spent a lot of money on, and right away there was a mutiny and the kids felt confined, because that's how public school was. It's confining. It's very much in a box. You will do what you're told, how you're told, when you're told, and you're not going to argue. And my kids had to deschool from that, and their spirits wanted to, like their souls were yearning to be free. So we would do the basics, read, write, do math. And I started reading about the different philosophies in education, these different, I would argue, pedagogies. Some would say, no, philosophy and pedagogy are two different things. I disagree. I think that they are, if they're not the same thing, then they're pretty stinking parallel. Okay, so let's start talking about the pedagogies. Because for us, I was studying all of these different pedagogies and these different philosophies and all these different things that I had never been taught in my post-baccalaureate work. And my kids started wanting to add a few things to the homeschooling as they continued to deschool. They started discovering certain interests and different things like that. And then they'd want to spend more time working on some things and less time working on other things. It got to the point my kids were like, okay, can we only do math for this long? Except for my then 9-year-old son, who's like, no, I want to spend more time doing math because he really enjoys math. And he wanted to spend more time doing sciencey things because he really enjoys science. But my daughter, who is now 15, it was really fascinating because she'd plow through her schoolwork, which was minimal, and then she'd want to read. And she would read. And she would read. In the meantime, I'm reading also all these different philosophies and all these books and trying to get as much in my head as possible, right? Because I had so much to learn, and I was in this new Harry Potter world that I was experiencing for the first time, and it was exciting and new and scary. But my daughter became a voracious reader. Like, she kind of liked reading while she was at public school, but because she had so much time on her hands, I mean, she started really reading and reading and reading and reading every book she could get her hands on. And I remember in March, she went down to the basement, and we have quite an extensive library. And since homeschooling, we've expanded that library. I'm kind of a little bit of a book hoarder. I'm trying to work on that, right? I don't want to be a book junkie, but I still am. And I'm working on it. That's part of my life. It's not reduced and simplified because I really love books a lot, and I love to touch them and feel them and smell them and all the things. And then I buy the audiobook too, it gets expensive. So she goes downstairs. She comes back upstairs with an armful of books, and she goes into her room, shuts the door, and she just reads and 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 reads. And in March, she came downstairs one day and she's teary-eyed. And I said, Katie, what is going on? And she's like, I just finished the Diary of Anne Frank. And I'm like, wow. She was like, I also read The Hiding Place. I read Number of the Stars. I read this book. I read that book. And she had read all these books about World War II and the Holocaust. And she's like, Mom, I'm just so sad about that people can be so cruel in this world. And at the same time, I want to understand more about World War II. So she ends up, starts to watch documentaries about World War II. She starts just really going deep into World War II, looking things up online, looking up more historical fiction, trying to figure out what was accurate and what was not in the books, and just really deep dives into World War II. Then it was kind of funny because one day she said to me, at the time she was 13, she said to me, Mom, I'm really concerned. And I said, about what? And she's like, well, I'm not on social media, but I am aware that social media censors people. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And she's like, yeah, that's what Adolf Hitler did back during the Nazi regime. And I'm like, interesting. And so she starts making these real world connections as a 13-year-old. And my mind is totally blown. And here I was still spending the year like studying like how to best teach her. And yet she was learning all this really cool stuff on her own without me coaxing her or using a curriculum to teach her about World War II. The next year, I end up getting her into a Thomas Jefferson education class, and I'll talk about that philosophy here in a minute. And she took the class, loved it, has discovered that she really, really loves history. And so for me, by the end of that first year, we moved into somewhat an unschooling model. And again, we're going to talk about what that philosophy and what some of these other philosophies are. But what I discovered is I was studying, number one, I was delighted by this learning that my daughter had done. And number two, I realized that we didn't quite fit into one specific philosophical mode, that there was several different ways that my kids learn effectively and that they enjoy. I'm not opposed to classes and things like that. I'm also a big advocate of unschooling, and we'll talk about that. But I'm not an unschooling purist. So we're going to talk about these philosophies. Now, before I go on, I have to say, she talked to some of her friends from public school, and they happened to read the Diary of Anne Frank as well. And she said to one of the girls at school, she's like, you guys just finished the Diary of Anne Frank. And she had read it just, in March, and this is like April. She's like, oh my gosh, I read that last month. And the girl's like, yeah, I thought it was super boring. And my daughter, who had become this voracious reader over a few months' time, was like, are you serious? Like she lived. Like Anne Frank was a real person and she died. And this was her struggle and it's beautiful and it's powerful. And so an interesting shift had happened for my daughter, because as she became a more voracious reader, she had experienced this beautiful, magnificent feast of literature and beauty, and had experienced all of these empathetic emotions through these books. And she had done it on her own. And her friends from school, who are still great kids, missed it all. They missed that whole empathetic piece where the literature changed them, because it didn't change them. They checked the box and they moved on to the next subject, and they missed the whole piece. For me, that was a delight as a parent. I was like, oh, holy cow, this is another testament that I made a good choice to homeschool my kids. Now, your days are not always going to be like that, my friends. There's going to be some days that your child will be screaming on the floor, laying there, kicking and screaming. You think, yep, this is my life. And guess what? It's okay. And those days pass, and you're going to have them, and that's normal. And take a big drink, maybe go wild and get yourself a Dr. Pepper, something. Anyway, but those days will pass. So let's get into the different homeschool philosophies, because there's some really stinking awesome homeschool philosophies out there. We're going to start with the first one, and hopefully we'll be able to get through all of them in one podcast. If not, this will become 2 podcasts. We have the first one is the traditional philosophy, the traditional pedagogy, which is you buy and this is what's generally taught in traditional public school as well as in private school now. Private schools used to be a little bit different. They have shifted and become more and more like public schools. This approach uses textbooks, workbooks, worksheets, quizzes, tests, teachers' manuals, and they go through very methodically, want the children to conquer and master individual subjects in specific content order, and you tell them this is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it. There's some curriculums that you can buy that are open and go, where you open them and you read them and to the child, and then you have them do this and you sit down with them, and it's traditional. It's the traditional method. It's school at home, which is what people think homeschool is. And when I talk to parents who have tried homeschooling, they're like, homeschooling didn't work for us. 99% of the time, it was because they literally only did the traditional method, which is doing school at home, where you sit down and you're the teacher and you're the end all be all, which you're not. And you go through the curriculum, and they sometimes don't, most of the time they don't like it. Okay. So that's the traditional model. It's literally school at home. By the way, it's not necessarily the most effective model. Some of your kids will like that style, and that's okay. My son, who is now 11 years old, I did a homeschooling interview with him last week to talk about what his interests were and what some of the things that he wanted to learn about are. And he said, Mom, I really want a specific math curriculum. I really love them. I love being able to go on the computer and going at my own pace. And I want an actual legitimate curriculum. I don't want to go just to a website. Now, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, when you're first starting to homeschool, don't go out and buy every curriculum under the sun. There are some free resources for you to start, kind of, if you feel like curriculums can be a great crutch for you at the beginning, and you might use them forever, and that's totally fine. It's what works best with your family, right? Everything goes back to what's best for your family. So free websites, Khan Academy, KHAN Academy.com. And they've got lots of free resources, right? Online resources for you. You can go to Prodigy.com for little kids to learn basic math. You could go to The Life of Fred, which teaches math in story form. So the Life of Fred books, you can get them at most public libraries and check them out. Don't buy the whole set. They're super expensive, but you can check them out and see if that might work for your child. They're for older kids, brilliant.org is a free resource if you're looking for math, as far as free math curriculum. There is also, if you want to start purchasing math curriculums, I would suggest that you go through and you look at what do they have where you can test out? Like, do they have any samples for you to look at before you actually purchase the curriculum? There's Saxon Math, and there's Abeka Math, and there is Math UC and teaching textbooks, and I'm sure I'm missing a whole bunch. But there's a lot of curriculums out there. Start with the free ones first to kind of decide and see where you want to go with it. Check out books from the library to start. So you don't have to just jump in and buy the curriculums. I know Teaching Textbooks offers like 15 free lessons, and you can see if the child likes it. I have one child who didn't like it at all, right? And so that curriculum doesn't work for them. I had another child who liked Math UC one year, and the next year they didn't. And so look at the different curriculums. Some of the free science curriculums out there, there's a ton. You just have to actually Google them. We've used mysteryscience.com, where they offer 5-minute lessons for kids, for the younger kids. Online, there's different engineering things. Really, like, there's lots of free resources out there. And then if you want more in-depth stuff, there's paid subscriptions. Some good paid subscriptions for older kids. If you're going to look at, okay, I do want some paid subscriptions for some classes. Coursera, Coursera.com. Coursera.com has college level courses that you pay for the whole subscription for the year. That's more expensive. And then you can take some classes that way. Some classes require, if you want credit for them, you have to pay extra. But in many cases, you'd pay for the curriculum and then they get to go through those classes. Lots of universities offer free online classes. Hillsdale College offers a free Constitution class online that one of my kids did and enjoyed it. And so those are some of the free resources. And you can look like what free classes are offered from universities. Another one, it's a subscription-based company, and it's called Wondrium, Wondrium. It also offers more for high schoolers, middle and high schoolers and college kids, classes at a subscription-based, which is kind of cool. And so start looking at things, but I wouldn't necessarily start purchasing everything. So that's where you can get started. Okay, if you want to go the traditional method, which is doing school at home. All right, let's talk about the classical method. Okay, the classical method follows the Greek approach, which is the progression goes through the phases of grammar, dialect, and rhetoric. A good book for this is A Well-Trained Mind by Susan Wise Bauer. And it's very logical and it's very systematic. And it's your traditional Greek education. So if you are interested in a very rigid philosophy, you could look at the Well-Trained Mind or the classical method. Again, it's based on Greek philosophy. If you were wanting to be, help your kids understand more philosophies, that's a great one to start with, is the classical method. Okay. For me, when I read The Well-Trained Mind, it's a great book and there's certain principles that I love from it. But for me, it was really, really too rigid. Knowing my kids that they would feel like very confined. However, I have friends whose kids love the classical method. They love that rigidity. But for me, it was too confining, and it was too confining for me as a human being, just as a mom, because I tend to be a very free spirit. Okay. But the classical method is, very much Greek philosophies. We're going over grammar, dialect, and rhetoric and understanding those. And that's the progression that your child will be learning. Okay. So that's the classical method. The Charlotte Mason method, which I actually really adore a lot of the principles from Charlotte Mason. So Charlotte Mason was a distinguished British educator in the late 1800s. And of all of the homeschooling philosophies, this is one of the biggest ones. She felt like school should be enjoyable for children. And so she emphasized the fundamentals of reading and writing and arithmetic, but also character development. And so her philosophy is that lessons should be very short and they needed to include nature study. They need to learn language art skills through narration, dictation, and copy work. She believed in living books that were rich versus textbooks. She didn't like textbooks. She believed in acquiring knowledge and understanding through experiential learning, through exploring, not just reading, but really exploring and to develop lifelong learning. There are Charlotte Mason purists out there. They're like, this is how you have to do everything. And this is how Charlotte Mason did things. She spends a lot of time, like the kids would spend time in the afternoon outdoors and they would do nature study and they'd spend a lot of time outdoors. And then they would do handicraft work. And so they would do a lot of that. So that's kind of a taste, a little bite of Charlotte Mason. Again, I love some of her philosophies. we moved to doing her reading, writing, or her reading I wouldn't call it a program, but her reading philosophy, where you have them dictate back a story. Sorry, I messed that up. You have them narrate a story for you. So you read them a story and then you have them orally narrate it back for you, or they could write back, a summary of what they've just read, which helps them recall things. There's also dictation, where you speak some literature to your children. You're reading out of a literature book and they have to write it. And then she also does copy work, where the children literally copy lines out of literature and beautiful writing, whether that's biblical or poetry or just great classical literature, that the kids write and copy that work. And in the process of doing those three things, the narration, dictation, and copy work, that they start learning principles of really beautiful and good writing. I believe that's one of the reasons my daughter did so well in her college classes as a freshman in high school. She took 2 composition classes and she aced both of them. And we hadn't done much writing other than narration, dictation, and copy work. And she read a whole lot, right? And she started to see good literature and how to write well by doing those things. Okay, so that's the Charlotte Mason method. So if you want to dive into Charlotte Mason, great thing to look up. Again, I've pulled pieces from lots of different philosophies. We've got the unit study method, which is with the unit study method, you seek to go very hands-on and you study as it sounds, like a unit. Like, we're going to study about birds, and then you base your math around the birds. You do projects around the birds, art projects and science projects and all the things. So your unit is based on a theme that you choose as a parent. Okay, so that's kind of a taste. Again, I'm not going deep into any of these philosophies because I'd have to have a podcast on every single one of them. And even then, it wouldn't be enough time to really deep dive. But you're combining several subjects under one unifying theme. Okay, so that's the unit study method. Okay, the next method is the Thomas Jefferson education method, or also called TJ Ed. It was created by the DeMille family many years ago. I've had my kids take TJ Ed classes. They're brilliant. It's also called leadership education, where you study original works and classic works of literature rather than textbooks. And then you have a mentor guide you or guide the student through the different ideas that are found within those texts or works. So then rather than reading a math textbook, you read about how Pythagoras came up with his theorems, how you study the life of these people and how they discovered and developed these different mathematical or science or literary principles. They also have TJ Ed classes, and parents can become trained to teach those classes, which is what I did with my kids, and they loved it. I did that for some of the history classes. So that's the Thomas Jefferson education model. Then there is the Waldorf education model. Waldorf education, also known as Steiner education, is based on the educational philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and he is the founder of anthroposophy. Its educational style is holistic, and it wants to develop intellect, artistic, and practical skills with a focus on imagination and creativity. And so and you've probably heard of like Waldorf schools. There's several around the United States. When I was in 4th grade, I went to a camp for a week and we did this theater production and everything was natural. And then in the afternoon, we made bread and we played outside a lot. And it was probably the favorite camp that I have ever gone to. Not that I went to a ton of them as being an 80s child, but I loved it. And it wasn't until I actually started studying educational philosophies that I realized, it was called the Waldorf School. I mean, it was in the name. I didn't realize it, but it engulfed the Waldorf education philosophy. Coming from the waldorfeducation.org website, this is how they describe it. Waldorf schools offer a developmentally appropriate, experiential, and academically rigorous approach to education. They integrate the arts in all of academic disciplines for children from preschool through 12th grade to enhance and enrich learning. Waldorf education aims to inspire lifelong learning in all students and to enable them to fully develop their unique capacities. It was founded in the early 20th century, and it's based on the insights, teachings, and principles of education outlined by the world-renowned artist and scientist Rudolf Steiner. So he wanted the principles of education, the Waldorf education, evolved from an understanding of human development that addressed the needs of a growing child. So they integrate music, dance, and theater, writing, literature. Legends and myths are not something to be just read about and tested. They're experienced. Through these experiences, the Waldorf students cultivate their intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual capacities to be individuals certain of their paths and to be of service to the world. Okay, so that's a little bit about the Waldorf style of learning. It's very artistically based, and there are Waldorf schools out there that are Waldorf specific. But I've seen lots of parents embrace a lot of ideologies within the Waldorf philosophy. Okay, so that's the Waldorf philosophy. Montessori. Let's talk about Maria Montessori for a second. And you've probably heard about Montessori schools before. A lot of homeschooling families love the Montessori philosophy. Maria Montessori was an Italian physician, an educator, and an innovator acclaimed for her educational method that builds on the way children learn naturally. Okay, so she opened her first school in 1907, and then she traveled the world and wrote about her approach to education. And now there's thousands of Montessori schools throughout the United States and throughout the world. So about Montessori, and this comes from the American Montessori Society website, amshq.org. It says, what is Montessori? Montessori is an education philosophy and practice that fosters rigorous, self-motivated growth for children and adolescents in all areas of their development, with a goal of nurturing each child's natural desire for knowledge, understanding, and respect. Why choose Montessori? Well, they learn what sets Montessori apart from traditional education, discover how it develops students who are capable, accountable, and knowledgeable with a strong sense of self and what they will need to thrive in the real world. Their 5 core components of a Montessori education include the following. Number 1, a properly trained Montessori teacher that is credentialed through Montessori and has the skills and expertise to implement high fidelity Montessori. Number 2, a multi-age classroom, right? Which if you homeschool more than one child, this would be you. Classes with 3-year age spans facilitate mentorship among the students and encourage leadership and development. Use Montessori materials. It's a hallmark of Montessori's specially designed materials that provide a hands-on approach to learning. Number 4, that it's child-directed work. So students are given agency to self-select work, leading to intrinsic motivation and sustained attention. And then the 5th pillar for Montessori is an extended period of free choice that enables students to work at their own pace and without interruption. And so again, there's pieces that as a homeschooler you can take from each of these philosophies. Let's keep going because there's some more philosophies. So that's Maria Montessori, or the Montessori philosophy. All right, let's talk about travel schooling or road schooling. It's just what it sounds like. If you are on Instagram, there's a family called the Bucket List Family, and they just travel the world, right? And actually, they put their kids in school, as I found out. Maybe they haven't anymore, but they did when their kids got old enough. But travel schooling or road schooling is exactly what it sounds like. You travel the world and you learn from the cultures and the customs of wherever you are, or whatever state you're visiting, or whatever province you're visiting. You go and tour museums and you get to know the people and the culture and the food and all of those things. Now, some people will road school and then do curriculum on top of that, which is fine because guess what? When you homeschool, you get to pick, and whatever you choose is right if it's right for your family, right? This is actually something that my family is preparing for next year. Next year, we plan on going to Italy for an entire month to 6 weeks. My husband's figuring out how he could work remotely still and do this. So we're trying to figure all those things out. But our plan is to spend time in one villa at a VRBO in one town in Italy. And then in the next year, we'll be studying Italian so that we can have some communication skills and study the art and the different things for the next year, and then go to Italy and live there. And instead of doing schoolwork per se there, travel and tour and see all of the beautiful things in Italy, and see the Sistine Chapel, and see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and see all of the things. Go to Vatican City, go, see all of the things in Rome and Florence and hear the music, right? That's travel schooling, road schooling. Again, there's some families that do travel schooling and road schooling, and then they choose to do curriculums with it, along with it, while they're traveling. That's totally, again, up to you. So that's travel schooling or road schooling. And it's essentially learning on the road and learning from the customs and the cultures around the area that you're visiting. Okay, the forest schooling. Forest schooling, I actually have a child that will be trying out a forest school this year. So forest schooling is exactly what it sounds. You go and you spend time in the forest, and the children learn from the forest. From the forestschoolassociation.org website, this is the basic principle for forest schooling. There's 6 guiding principles, and here's the first one. Forest school is a long-term process of frequent and regular sessions in a woodland or natural environment rather than a one-off visit. Planning, adaptation, observations, and reviewing are integral elements of forest school. Principle 2, forest school takes place in a woodland or natural wooded environment to support the development of a relationship between the learner and the natural world. Principle 3, forest school aims to promote the holistic development of all those involved, fostering resilient, confident, independent, and creative learners. Principle 4, forest school offers learners the opportunity to take supported risks appropriate to the environment and to themselves, like climbing trees, my friends. Principle 5, forest school is run by qualified forest school practitioners who continuously maintain and develop their professional practice. And Principle 6, forest school uses a range of learner-centered processes to create a community for development and learning. So I was at the farmer's market today. Actually, it wasn't a farmer's market. They usually have the farmer's market there, but it was a big festival in the Black Forest where I live in Colorado. And they do it once a year. And so I was going around to the different booths, and I came upon a forest school. My daughter's not going to be attending that one, but it was so fun to talk to them. And they're like, we'll be hiking here and doing this and doing this. So another natural way of learning, especially for younger children, forest schooling is fabulous. I have a niece who sends her 3-year-old to forest school, and he loves it. And this develops a love for the natural world, which is really, really cool. Okay, another philosophy, which actually I've recently been introduced to, is the Foundation for American Christian Education, also called FACE, F-A-C-E. Okay, so this philosophy was developed by Verna Marie Hall and Rosalie June Slater, and they had some questions in 1965, specifically, do your children look and wonder how different their lives will be? Will America drifting steadily away from her moral character and Christian heritage of true liberty? The future looks uncertain at best. How can we equip our children to live in an ever-changing, unpredictable world? How do we ensure that the America that our forefathers built was the same one our grandchildren know? Those were the questions that were asked by these two ladies. And so Miss Hall was a historian, and Miss Slater, an educator, saw hope for America in both their past and their future. And so they looked into America's Christian history and looked at historically what was happening. And so they wanted America's children to be taught the same biblical principles and individual character that built the nation in the first place. And so they created a curriculum called the Noah Plan, and there are schools based on the Foundation for American Christian Education, as well as homeschool resources and different approaches and everything to teach a Christian, biblically based foundation to your children in the math and the sciences, as well as history, art, and all of the other things. So that is called the Foundation for an American Christian Education, which I was just introduced to recently. And then finally, and again, there may be others that I'm missing, and I'm sorry if you are like, no, we do this approach, and I missed you, and I missed that approach. Feel free to reach out to me. I could add it in the future. But the final one I want to talk about is one that we predominantly do in our household. We're actually, well, there's two more. So we'll go with the one and then what we predominantly do. But the last two, the first one I want to go over is the unschooling method. Now, this was created by John Holt in the late 20th century. And with unschooling, it's also called child-led learning, student-directed learning. There's different terms for it. Unschooling's kind of a terrible term for it because it implies that you're not schooling. But unschooling is not schooling. It's just child-led learning. And so, as I mentioned in our story, when our daughter Katie started delving into history, specifically into World War II, what I didn't realize was happening was that she was essentially unschooling, right? It was student-directed learning. She had a subject in her heart and in her mind that she wanted to learn more about. So she started to really, really focus on that, and every resource I could get for her on that subject, she would eat up, she would use. Okay, so with unschooling, it doesn't follow a particular curriculum or a scheduled plan. Children are encouraged to pursue their interests and the things that they're naturally curious about. And so that's the unschooling approach. So for a family like ours, my son is obsessed with YouTube right now and creating videos. So I got him a class. He wanted to learn how to use Premiere Pro. So I ensured that we had resources for him, not only YouTube videos for him to watch to learn Premiere Pro through the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite, but that if he needed classes, I could get him classes. We found a mentor for him. It's a little bit of the Thomas Jefferson education model, as you find a mentor to teach and to help them understand something. So we found a mentor for him, and he's gone through and he's reading the YouTube Formula, which is a book by the guy that helped Mr. Beast, the famous YouTuber, become popular. And so he started studying everything he could about how to create really great YouTube videos, right? So that's a very typical unschooling thing. So with unschooling, it's child-led learning. So if your child's interested, you discover what your child's interested in, and then you as a parent provide the resources for them to learn that thing. Okay. There are some unschooling parents that are purists who are like, no, the child should never take a class. I disagree with that. So I guess I'm not a purist, but if a child's interested in learning something, I'm going to provide all of the resources that I possibly can, starting with what's online and the library, to help them learn that subject, whatever that subject is. And it doesn't have to be reading, writing, math, science. It could be dance. It could be art. It could be literature. It could be Minecraft. It could be, whatever the thing is, you foster that love of learning by providing them the resources that they need to learn that, whatever that thing is. Okay. And they might switch and be like, I don't want to learn any more about this. I'm done. And that's okay. Part of unschooling is you go, okay, well, let's move on to what you're interested in. There's people who are totally against unschooling. At the beginning, I had heard the term and I was like, yeah, no way, no how. And yet that's the philosophy that we ended up moving and gravitating most towards, because I realized when kids are in school, they're told what to do, how to do it. They're told what to study and what to learn. And yet a lot of these kids thirst for the freedom to be able to choose what they love to do. I was thinking about that at the festival today, at the Black Forest Festival that I was at today, when we came upon a booth and these two ladies were sitting there with this very intricate wooden loom, weaving loom, and then a spinning wheel. I've never seen a real life spinning wheel in use before. And they were sitting there spinning wool into thread and into yarn and then making these tapestries. I was totally enthralled. And I thought to myself, I bet they didn't learn these things when they were in school, right? But here are these two ladies, I'm guessing they were in their 60s, and this was their whole livelihood. This was their life, and they loved it. As adults, we naturally tend to unschool. If we want to learn a subject, we take a class to learn that subject, or we go online and we obsess over that subject, right? We naturally unschool as adults all the time, right? Unless we're in a job and we have to learn something, we will. But with the unschooling philosophy, the philosophy says, no, the child is going to learn if they're interested in the subject. They will find a way to learn that thing, whatever it is. So as a parent, make it easier by providing the resources for them. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not 100%, and by the way, I love the unschooling model, and we do consider ourselves heavily unschoolers, but not 100% unschoolers, which brings to the last philosophy, which I'd like to share with you, which is the relaxed or eclectic homeschoolers. Relaxed or eclectic. What does that mean? We're the people who we don't exactly fit into one mold. We like pieces of Charlotte Mason, and we like pieces of Montessori, and we like pieces of unschooling. And so we do a hodgepodge of several different styles. As I've mentioned, my kids have done some Thomas Jefferson education classes, and we followed that model, and we've studied great literature. We've done unschooling where my kids are I want to learn about this. And I'm like, okay, let's learn about that thing, whatever it is. In my son's case, I have a child that is super interested in, he wants to go to a blacksmith shop, and we happen to have one in town where he can learn to forge, and he wants to learn to forge. So I'm creating that opportunity for him. So we're unschooling in that regard. But for writing right now, we're doing Charlotte Mason, and we're doing narration, dictation, and copy work. And for math, I have a child who wants a specific curriculum. And so we're not doing one set thing, because for our family, we tend to be eclectic, and several different ideologies work for us. Right now, for Christmas, I'm making my daughter a Waldorf doll, which is a naturally fibered doll. One of the things with Waldorf education is everything is natural, and it feels like the hand, wood and wool and cotton feel better to children's hands. So you want toys that are natural toys, right? And I'm making her a naturally felted Waldorf doll. I'm learning myself how to make it. And so I'm incorporating that into my own learning by employing some of the Waldorf education philosophy, right? So the last philosophy are the eclectic homeschoolers, which pull from lots of different philosophies, and that's okay. So whatever philosophy you choose to go with, whether it's classical or Waldorf or Montessori or unschooling or the traditional method or forest schooling or travel schooling or whatever, unit study, if it works for your family, then it's right. If it doesn't work for your family, you try something else. And you try it until things work. The cool thing is, again, as you start to learn your children's learning styles, certain ideologies and certain pieces of philosophies will really resonate with certain kids. And that's awesome. That's great. There's not one right way. The wrong way is the thing that doesn't work for your child, the thing that doesn't help them love learning. That's the wrong way. The right way is whatever works best for you and your family, whether you use a curriculum or not, whether it's secular or religious or not, that is totally up to you. and whatever is best for your family. So if you ever hear somebody that's like, no, this is how you need to homeschool, they're wrong. What's right is what's best for you and your family. I can't dictate that. Somebody else can't dictate that for you. That's something that as a parent, you get to discover and you get to decide, which is the beauty of homeschooling, is you are in the driver's seat with your kids on this beautiful, wonderful adventure. So with that, I encourage you to start learning about the different philosophies and try out different pieces of the philosophies. See what works best for you. And again, maybe some things resonated today and other things you're like, no. Initially, unschooling did not resonate with me until I started reading about unschooling. By the way, great book, Unschooled by Carrie McDonald. Love that book. I became super passionate about unschooling after I read that